In this video, I'm going to show you step by step on how to install this Curt 13591 hitch on this GMC Terrain. Now you can install this by yourself using a floor jack. It is relatively simple to do and it should be done in under an hour. Now the most important step is to clean the threads on your vehicle's chassis. Now we're going to be threading in some bolts into some factory installed threaded nuts. And you're going to make sure that those are cleaned out by either compressed air or some WD-40. So in the install kit there's going to be some hex bolts. Hand thread those in first. Make sure they go in before starting the install. So let's get started. So if you take a look at the chassis here on the passenger side, you'll see the threaded holes. Now you're just going to take your hex bolts and you're going to hand thread these in. Just make sure those are cleared out and that you can get the bolts in before starting the install. I'll do this on all 6 of these weld nuts if you have them, or you're going to do the 4 and then we're going to use the carriage bolts in the middle. Just make sure these threads are cleared out before you start. If you have an older vehicle with a lot of rust on it and you can't get your bolts in, you're going to need to get a 12 by 1.75 tap, and you're just going to need to chase the threads. You can spray a little bit of WD-40 on this tap, and you can use a small wrench. You're just going to run the tap through the threads so that you can get your bolts in. So in some vehicles you'll have threaded weld nuts in the center. Now this one does not, so we need to use the fish wire technique. And you're going to have this plate, this carriage bolt, the fish wire, and we're just going to fish this through the chassis and coming down to bolt in the center of the hitch. To do the fish wire technique, you'll see that I have the wire going through this hole back here in the chassis. And it's going to come out this hole right here. Now what you need to do is get yourself a pair of needle nose pliers. And you're going to grab onto the wire and pull straight down, and that's going to pull your bolt through. Now you can see that wire coming through that hole. You're just going to pull that through. Your bolt's going to slide on through. Just make sure you don't knock your bolt back up into there. So that's what that first bolt's going to look like when you pull it through. Now just take your fish wire off and do the same thing to the other side. If you do have to use the fish wire method, that's what it's going to look like. If you already have weld nuts there, you're in luck because that's a heck of a lot easier. If you use the fish wire technique, take your time, don't yank on it. It's a little bit frustrating, but you can get it. Easy way to do this yourself, all I do is put it on top of my floor jack and I slowly pump the jack up, and we're going to put nuts on those 2 center bolts first. Be careful you do not push those bolts back up into the chassis channel. Now anytime I install hitches, I always put Loctite 242 on all the nuts and bolts, because after all these are going to vibrate down the road and you don't want any of these nuts to back off. Tightening up the middle is a little bit tricky. You can either use an open end box wrench or you can use a socket with a universal joint like this. Once you have the nuts on in the center, I don't tighten them all the way up. I leave them loose and then I start going to the side. I'm going ahead and put the passenger side bolts in first. I don't have them tight, I just have them snug because I still want to be able to move it around a little bit to line up the other side. So at this point I have the 2 middle bolts snug and I have 1 bolt in the bottom on each side, and I'm just now putting in that top bolt. A torque wrench, go around and torque all bolts to 80 foot-pounds. That's what the finished product looks like. You can barely see the hitch. Congratulate yourself on installing your own hitch, learning a little bit about your car, and saving yourself some time and money. I got 2 tips for you to make this easier. If you have to use that fish wire technique, take your time, don't get frustrated. If you can't get it through that channel, just take a break and try it again. There's a couple little things in there that it might catch on. If you already have the weld nuts, hey, you're home free. It's going to be a super easy install. Second thing, I would get yourself one of these taps, spray it with a little WD-40, and just chase the threads. You're not cutting the threads. You're just basically chasing and cleaning out the threads. That way when you go to put those bolts in, you can hand thread them maybe about 3/4 of the way before you got to put on your ratchet. That's going to make it a little bit easier for you. Hope you guys found this step-by-step video helpful and informational. Thanks for watching.